Camileers.
It's interesting because obviously you know that I did my film documentary Afghan Camileers in Australia, and how difficult it is to get to the outback of Australia and to deal with the people and to get that story out. Did you find it difficult then?
I was working with a group of people I didn't know, and I didn't know where they were. So I was determined to find them. So I would have to go in my little car out to Beltana, out to Maree, and I would come into Maree, for example, and ask the people around the town, what is the name of the families here? Where's the Gan town? So I walked around the Gan town. I mapped the Gan town with an old Afghan descendant called Arshi Dadla.
This in Maree.
Yes, I wanted to know whose house, which family lived where, because the family names tell me about the origin of the family, and then it tells me who's married who. Because what I learnt was when the first Camileers came here, they were not allowed to bring their women with them. So many of the men could not get back home, so they actually married either European women or Aboriginal women. And in those days, there were arranged marriages. And the interesting thing, Fahim, is that they brought their culture with them. So when they came here, the men who married local women, they married their daughter off to an Afghan son, and there was bride price involved, and the girls were
really?
given. Yes, all that happened, just like it happens in Afghanistan. It happened over here. I found that fascinating too. And then I would ask the women what it was like to be an Afghan's wife. And then I'd ask an Afghan son, where did you work with your father? But to find these people, I even went to Broken Hill. I met all the families there, and I sketched the streets. And then I had to go to Wilcannia because there was more descendants out there. It was a bit intimidating because when I got to Broken Hill, the police told me not to go to Wilcannia on my own, not to stop on the road for anybody, because things can happen to travellers in the outbacks of Australia.
Why?
On those roads.
Why what sort of thing?
Because if someone's standing on the side of the highway and trying to wave you down, their intentions may not be, can you help me, my tyre is flat. Their intentions might be to attack the driver of the car that's passing and then to take the car from them and leave them stranded and to rob them.
Oh, that's the robbery
That's
stuff.
what the police said to me. So they said, don't go to Wilcannia. Well, if you tell me not to go to Wilcannia, that's what I'll do. I will go to Wilcannia.
And did you go there?
Oh, I went there. And then I went looking for more stories about the Afghans, and I learned a lot about, went from Wilcannia then to Burke. We learned a lot about Abdul Wahid and his company and his descendants. And of course, all over Australia where the Afghans were, there are the Afghan cemeteries, which is another legacy they've left us. They've left us the tracks. They've opened up tracks that now became the railway lines, and the big tracks now, like Strzelecki track, where a lot of the big trucks go now out to the mining fields. They gave us that infrastructure of roads, but they also left us a legacy of their Gan towns, which are fascinating, their cemeteries, which are fascinating. That's part of their legacy, and their food.
Food, obviously, yeah. I can tell you the part of difficulties I faced when I was traveling to outback of Australia, because I came to Australia obviously 2008 and 9, and then I was traveling to outback of Australia maybe 20 or 30 days after my arrival in Australia. Right, my English was so poor, and obviously when you go to the outback, the English of outback people, they're completely different from the city.
Different accent, yeah.
Different accents. So that was something that I faced so many difficulties and trying to understand what is they talking about.
Yes, yeah. But you could just tape their voices though, could you, Fahim? Was that easy?
It was way easier then, because I was recording them. Until to get to the recording, you need to discuss with the people to make sure what they're talking about. But all good. That was some of the experience.
That's the thing, you see, when I first met the descendants, nobody had shown an interest in them. So I'm talking 1980s. So when I would go into Maree...
Yeah, that is actually interesting, because I heard that one.
When I went into Broken Hill and Maree, first I rang from Adelaide or sent a letter out. So I got their names and addresses from telephone books in Adelaide, and then I send them a letter to say I'm coming, this is why I'm coming. And then when I turn up, I knock on the door, and so they knew who I was, and they didn't understand why I was even interested in their history. A lot of the Afghans have got a skin colour and are married with Aboriginal people, so a lot of them used to just call them offensive names, and they never had a high pride in themselves. So I would go into their homes and sit down with them and take notes and talk. And eventually, after the book came out, we had a big launch in Adelaide. I felt that they got a bit more pride in their heritage, and then that pride began to grow a bit more, because until then they didn't feel they had a place in Australia's history or Australia's heritage until people were telling their stories.
Well, you just talk about the Aboriginal people in outback of Australia and the relationship between Afghan and Aboriginal people. What you can tell a story on that topic? Obviously, one of your book is Linden Girl, which is exactly what it's on about. And what, if you can just give us a little bit of summary of the book and what was actually difficulties as Afghan?
Well, I had met Afghan families, and whether they were Afghan white, Afghan Aboriginal, I never paid much attention. To me, they were just people. But I then went and researched the story of one particular Afghan called Jack Akbar and his lovely wife Lali. I didn't meet them, but I remember meeting a lovely Aboriginal Afghan woman called Mona, who was such a warm person. And when I asked her what I ask all the descendants, so who was your mother, who was your father, she said to me, well, I don't know. I don't know anything about them. And that to me was a shock. I couldn't understand why she wouldn't know. All the other descendants know. Anyway, I researched that story and I found out that there was a lot of history behind her parents, the people on the cover there, that they had never told their children. And when you look at the Aboriginal Act of 1905 in Western Australia, there was an act that banned the marriage of Afghans in particular, and Aboriginal women. And that goes back to the White Australia policy. But also there was a policy now to eliminate Aboriginal people.
It's good to remind her that the Afghan were not allowed to bring their women to Australia.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that was to do with the White Australia policy at the time.
So now the Afghan want to marry with the Aboriginal woman, but they're not allowed to do it.
No, because that's to do with the Aborigines Act, though. That's different again. Where the Aborigines Act meant that the Chief Protector of Western Australia or South Australia would control who part Aboriginal women married. The idea being if they married white men, they would breed the colour out.
Right.
Right. So
were they allowed to marry with the, let's say, white woman?
Oh, yes, okay. Definitely, because that meant the colour would breed out. So the Aboriginal people don't throw colour back like they do in the Afro-American can throw colour back, which means a Negro in America would marry a white woman, the children would become paler, suddenly the child would become dark again.
But there are lots of intermarriages between Afghan and Aboriginal.
Well, because they're so suited. In the first chapter there of my book, I talk about how suited the Afghans were with the Aboriginal women. Aboriginal women were prepared to travel with the Afghans. They understood where water could be found. They taught the Afghans how their plants were used for medicinal purposes, and the Afghans already knew that too. They had so much in common. They both come from a desert culture. They both understand how to live with heat and lack of water and scarcity of food. Aboriginal women often made the Afghan more comfortable in the camp at night. She might prepare the food, go fetch the water, fetch the firewood. There's a lot of in their cultures. They're very similar.
Oh, what similarity in the culture?
In their cultures, yeah.
Between Afghan and Aboriginal.
Yeah, and Aboriginal cultures also married the daughters off. They have an arrangement in their culture where Aboriginal daughters are married off according to the tribal colours.
And one thing you can see, obviously, the family base of Aboriginal people is more like Afghan people. They are always based in the family.
Family is very important.
Very important. They just go grandmother, grandfather. They always
that's
living
right.
in the same place normally.
That's right. The marriages of Afghans with white men were also happy marriages, because I met a lot of those daughters too, and they didn't feel that their life was deprived by the fact that if you're born in Australia to an Afghan father, you had to stay at home as a girl. You were not allowed to go out. If you wanted to go to the shop in Maree, you had to be chaperoned. So they lived under those sort of cultural restrictions that the Afghan Kamalis brought from Afghanistan and northwest India. But they didn't feel deprived by that. They believed that they were well looked after. One of the daughters said to me it was good to be married to an Afghan because Afghans were very handsome men and they worked very hard and they made sure you had a good home.
Wow, that's interesting. Oh, wow. That's actually, we can't finish this story, but Pamela, we have to go for a break now.
Okay.
And then we come back and maybe we talk a little bit on the topic of Afghan and Aboriginal, especially in regard to the religion, Islamic religion, and how they lost and how that's happened and why this happened. And also, we still have our coins, so we're going to discuss on this soon.
Yes.
So be with us.
Great.
Be with us. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.